today seems full of technical difficulties, but I did want to finish chapter 12 of my story called Bliss After Life. This is book 1, and I have read up to chapter 12, halfway through, which is the story of Bliss, who's passed away at 95, and this second part refers to her funeral. 12, the funeral. The first bit is only a tiny bit, so I continue the sentence before. They walked somberly behind the coffin. The hospital had taken what they considered worthwhile. Neither Holly nor Susan had wanted to know what was taken. The knowledge that something was worth rescuing was quite enough. Who cared what it was? Holly held on to Tony and Chris on her other side. Susan was happy that Ben had been the wonderful son she always wanted him to be. Steve, her ex, was away on a tour. He had been unable to attend, and Susan thought that was just fine. He did not deserve to be here. Ben looked lovely in his suit. His skin was brown and looked so sophisticated. She saw him rarely like this. It was nice to see him so good-looking. They had all loved their Omi, reverting back to the German lovely term to address a grandmother. She always tried to stay with it, and sometimes that had been easier with her grandchildren than with her own children when they were young. As all mothers, she was frequently embarrassing. It was a little church, and that was packed. Suzanne had insisted on choosing the music, and Albinoni's organ concerto greeted them at the entrance. Oh no, Holly thought, this is just such a tearjerker. Her mum always shed a tear when she heard this piece. It reminded her of her dad, and she used to play it sometimes to wallow a bit, as she called it. Well, Mum would certainly have had a smile about Susan's choice of music. Holly had an inkling what the next few pieces were going to be. The vicar spoke very reverently. I don't know if she would have liked this, Holly thought. All much too religious for Mum. Bliss did not like organized religion, and the whole hell and damnation thing was a constant irritation to her. Most religions gave the responsibility of life to God, Allah, Jesus, and her mum always thought this was nonsense. We are all responsible for our own conscience, she used to say. We know what's right or wrong, we just choose to ignore it very often, but we are only answering to our true self when we return. Holly had always been entirely in tune with her mum on this. Chapter 13. Bliss. So, here I am. I think to describe it as a library would make the most sense, although ultimately it is what we want it to be. But for me, it feels like a place of learning, and therefore it appears as a library. I'm starting my studies, and I have a warm sense of anticipation as I immerse myself in the atmosphere. My group is near me, and I meet my oldest guide. She's always here on my returns, and I'm very pleased to see her again. She shines with a deep blue light and is all smiles. Welcome back, my good friend. Shall we begin at the end? I stood next to her and we opened the book of my life. This is difficult to describe, but the nearest would be a book with complete three-dimensional action, similar to a film, but real. I can see my funeral, I feel the atmosphere in the church. A church. We do return to basic at times. I wanted a celebration for my life, which I lived as happy as I knew how, and I was very glad to hear a lovely song my husband had written for me a very long time ago. How apt that it should finally be heard in public, even though now both of us had gone. There was a lot of joy in the music, and I sent warm and happy energy to all assembled. I saw tears, and I wish I could wipe them. They are not necessary. We never do realize that life is a continuous process, ever changing and experiencing. The attachment to our bodies is, I suppose, one of those points of living. The earthly existence is created for this very reason, but we have lived lives for thousands of years, and it seems sometimes we seem none the wiser during our earthly lives. The act of remembrance takes more work than we are prepared to give, and I feel again that despite my progression in consciousness of my soul, I considered my ego more than my happiness very often. In fact, again, I confused the consideration of my ego with happiness many times. Let me consider my life. Chapter 14. Considering my life. The wonderful thing about looking back at one's last incarnation is the knowledge that this is the opportunity to consider alternative paths one could have taken. I'm able to see my actions and see at the same time what these actions have meant to the people whose path I crossed all through my life. I can see what might have happened if I had not influenced another's destiny, and I can see how others have changed the path of my life. The immersion into the last incarnation is complete and takes a long time in earth terms. We have to learn to understand our actions and take responsibility for all creations, as our thoughts are creations and actions are the result of our thoughts. At this point, we always realize the true meaning of remembrance, and the exploration of one's existence can be very painful, not in an earthly sense, but rather as an acceptance of one's follies, and always the resolve to come closer to the truth. We are the judge of our actions, and the full implications of actions are what teaches us to reach a higher path of consciousness. This takes time. Our soul group takes part in this exploration. Many are instrumental in our lives, and our paths cross again and again. My life had been very active during the last 95 years. I was blessed with learning a lot about many countries in the world through my work. I traveled and met many different cultures. Cultures are interesting to study because as earthbound physical beings, we are very attached to our bodies, families, religions, neighbors, cities, and countries. The physical existence seems to bring with it an almost inevitable identification with the surroundings. The realization at point of death, the remembrance of the existence of the soul, which is another part of the self, is very often a surprise. Many beings have removed their identification with the deepest, truest sense of self completely. So often I've seen beings here arrive in a state of total fear, and I still find it hard to understand why they feel this first impression of this beautiful place appearing to them as hell. I remember Anthony, a long time ago now, who came here having been executed. He was terrified, and he was sure this was hell. Hot, stifling, dark hell. This hell exists, but it's simply something imagined or expected. Anthony was considered an evil man, and even in my purest being here, I'm glad to say that I have not met many people like Anthony. He spent his life in enjoyment of cruelty. Cruelty he perpetrated. He had a complete warped sense of life. He exuded negativity even after he arrived here. His life history was very complex, and he got stuck in similar lessons for many lives. I'm grateful I was not involved in his story of existence. This was for more experienced minds than mine. Hell does not exist here at all. It is the loveliest part of existence coming back here after the physical experience. But if the being expects utter misery due to the things they have done in their life on earth, then the first impression gives them what they expect. There are no shortcuts to paradise. Religion has done very little in realizing our true potential. It often reinforces the dissuading of one's responsibilities. Following a doctrine is considered a guarantee for God's benevolence. God. We come to her at a later stage. There is work to be done. I shall have to do this by myself. It was my life, and I shall enjoy going back. Chapter 15. Bliss in Remembrance. I spent a long time in consideration, and after this work I went for a rest in my favorite place. I have changed the appearance of this place through many returns, but this time I'm at my favorite place at the sea. The wonderful peace I can create is a balm to my soul. I have made contact with many of my soulmates. I healed myself. My rejoining with my last partner in my life as bliss was as joyful as it always is. We are not part of the same group, but we have met in many incarnations. We agreed that we have progressed in a deep level of understanding, and our love was allowed to flourish through the true understanding of the acceptance of absolute responsibility for one's own happiness. It was a joy to meet and hear him express, "You told me so." We laughed. The many times we spent talking about my idea of the afterlife and his idea of Catholicism. A merging of souls in its true sense is such a wonderful experience. I'm happy to be able to say that Earth gives us physical experience, but death gives us the true realization of another existence. The consideration of the realization of the fullest potential envisaged at birth is a true rewarding state of being. Of course, never perfect. It is not supposed to be, as there are many ways to enjoy life. I shall enter my role as guide very soon, and I look forward to it, a role to play again. I can't wait. So, this is chapter 15 finished, and the next one is chapter 16.